All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is May 19th, 2022, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, with Kathy Smith Andrew, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born in Muncie, Indiana in 1944.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
John F. Wallace and Emily Wallace. Her first name was actually Harriet, but she hated that, so she went by her middle name, Emily Wallace.
Okay, and when did your family first get to Indiana?
Well, my great-grandfather came to Indiana following the potato famine.
Oh, okay.
He apparently joined the English Navy and then jumped ship in New Orleans.
Wow.
And came to Indiana because we were building the canals then. We thought canals were the transportation of the future in that time. And people who came from overseas and, were no Irish should apply, is all over the East Coast. He came up and tried to find work on one of the canal teams, but he didn't find work there. He really started out in Ohio and then moved to Indiana. My grandmother was his final child, and he had like 24 or 26 kids because he outlived 3 women that he married. So he was prolific, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I guess a real man's man. But that's how they got here, and that was the potato famine was what,
49.
46, 49?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was after that.
Yeah.
And you know how the Irish and the English did not get along, and he joined the English Navy.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
just to get here.
That's interesting. Okay. And do you have any siblings?
I had an older sister,
Mm-hmm.
Bonnie. She passed away probably 6 years ago.
Okay.
I'm the last of the Mohicans in my family,
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
except for cousins and
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Extended family. Yeah. So, how would you describe your childhood?
I had a good childhood. My parents valued education and valued us. My mother worked, which was not the model back then
Yeah.
as I was growing up. And I remember women saying to me, mothers of other classmates, "Oh, that's right, your mother works. I'm so sorry." And I didn't even think to say, well, it's good. It's a good thing, because she taught deaf children to speak and to read lips instead of use sign language.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
yes, and that was the model of that was brought forward by Spencer Tracy's son was deaf, and his wife, who was not the actress, founded the school for him and had people come. Annie Sullivan
Mm-hmm.
spelled into Helen Keller's hand, kind of sign language, but not really keeping her from communicating with everybody else.
Right.
And my mother felt that if you didn't want to have the person only be able to communicate with people who knew American Sign Language, that it was very important that they learn to read lips. And when she started, the kids wore batteries all down in a white pocketed thing.
Okay.
And then after the space program started, when they had to miniaturize everything,
Yeah.
that made a huge difference in children's ability to get both of them had to get hearing aids that they could hear sound. It was only a very small portion then who are stone deaf, who are unable to hear. And my mom would tap her foot on the wood floor to get their attention, and then she would say the word and then put her hand on, and they would try to say it. She would show them again and again, back and forth.
Huh. Wow.
And I helped her in the summers. So when I started teaching, I could read lips, kind of.
Yeah.
And that was hysterically funny. 'Cause they'd say something in the back of the room, and I'd say, "Oh, you want to know if she's going to do this?" And they'd go, "How does she know? How does she know?" That was fun.
That's a useful skill as a teacher. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, who would you say were the most influential people then in your childhood?
Well, my teachers were. My father was. Those are the most influential.
Yeah.
And I guess my Catholic religion and Catholic upbringing, too.
Mm-hmm. Sure. What did you know about your family's political beliefs growing up?
I knew they voted every time.
Okay.
I didn't know if we were Republican or Democrat because it would change with the president that they decided they would support.
Okay, yeah. Interesting, all right. And what schools did you attend growing up?
I started out at Muncie Burris as a kindergartner, and then St. Mary's built classrooms for the Catholic kids to go to. So I think it was my 4th grade through my 6th grade that I was at St. Mary's School, and then it ended, and I went back to Burris for 7th through 12th.
Okay. All right.
And that Burris High School was a really special place.
Oh, okay.
Because it was, number one, it was the laboratory school for Ball State University.
Wow.
And a lot of my teachers, especially in high school, were professors.
Wow.
Had their doctorate, you know.
Yeah.
And my class was very, when scholarships, merit scholarships came out, we had several in my class, and my class was under 100 people. And then when there are Truman scholarships they give out after you graduate from undergrad for graduate school, again, people in my class got many of them. So like 95% of the people in my high school senior class went on to college.
Wow, okay, that's, impressive, jeez. Let's see. So it sounds like you had pretty good educational experience. Did you have any favorite subjects in school?
Yes, English was my favorite subject.
Yeah. Were you part of any like clubs or sports teams or something? Or?
Well, women didn't really have any sports teams then.
Yeah.
We had GAA, Girls
Okay.
Athletic Association, and you'd play.
Okay.
But I was not athletically inclined.
Okay.
I'm still not. No, swimming and lifeguarding I did.
Oh, okay.
But I was in the drama club. I was in the literature, the magazine that we put out throughout our high school, things like that. I did a lot of plays.
Okay. So how did you view Indiana growing up? Were you like aware of like what it was like to be someone from Indiana compared to other parts of the country, or?
No, not really.
Okay.
Not really. Just that was home.
Yeah, sure.
My dad and mom did Sunday drives that were at least 2 hours long. We went all over the state to look at different things. We went to Brookville to look at the last remaining parts of the canal system, and all over. The worst one was there's going to be a new lake near Muncie, the Prairie Creek Lake. One Sunday we spent 4 hours going up and down country roads looking for the fingers of that. What would be when it all. I mean, that was just terrible.
Yeah.
I had things I needed to do for school, you know.
Sure.
And there I am in the car.
Yeah, that's right. So what did you do after high school then?
I worked at the local pool in Muncie, and then went to IU.
Okay. And what was your major at IU?
My major was English Language Arts.
Okay. And were you involved with any clubs at IU at all, or?
I was in a sorority,
Okay.
Pi Beta Phi, and really no clubs. I did a lot of work in the sorority. I was the song chairman.
Let's see. So what were your goals after graduation?
I did not stay all 4 years. I married between my junior and senior year and spent my final year at Purdue taking special classes that would apply to my degree, and then came back the summer after that and took intersession, regular session, and post-session at IU summer schools where, you're there like 5 hours a day, and then you have to read so many pages that night, and it's very, very intense. But that completed my degree. And then my husband at the time wanted to go to law school. He applied at University of Louisville and was accepted. So that's how I got down to New Albany, Indiana, right on the Ohio River across from Louisville, Kentucky. And that's where I taught.
Okay.
And I loved it.
Yeah, sure. So did your awareness of politics change at all when you were in college? Did you get more interested in politics, or?
Yes. I remember when Barry Goldwater ran for president, that really scared me. And they did a lot of work on college campuses. They did a good job campaigning. And I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, is this guy going to make it? And he said he didn't think he would, and not to worry about it. He didn't think that he would be elected.
Yeah.
So that was, I'm sure now that I must have been aware.
Yeah, yeah. And let's see, do you have any children?
Yes, I have one daughter, Allison.
Okay. And so how would you say your family sort of influenced your career and your interest in getting involved with the General Assembly later on?
Actually, my family taught me to be aware of people who are not as lucky as I was to have been born in a middle-class family, number one. Muncie Burris was the same way. Muncie Burris teachers were very much involved in having you give back to your community somehow. So that started my awareness.
Okay.
Empathy, I was not accepted all that well by my mother, and so I was kind of on the outside looking in.
Sure.
And developed a lot of empathy for people that I saw having trouble with anything,
Yeah.
whether it was opening a door or whatever, or reading, or
Sure.
So when I went to college, that continued, and that awareness was that I realized that there was one political party, that did a lot for people who were not as lucky as I was, and stood tall for those people.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started becoming a Democrat. And my senior year, when I was at Purdue with my then husband, I remember we met a gal and her husband, and I really liked her, but he was a real pain. And he was always giving me grief about caring about black people. And I remember one day he came and said, hey, I just signed you up for the NAACP. And I said, you did? I said, how am I going to know where the meetings are and when and he thought I would get all and he said, I didn't do that. I said, oh, darn. Well, maybe I'll try to do that.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you went, did you go from IU to Purdue, or how did you get to Purdue?
Yes, I went from IU to Purdue. I took 2 classes at Purdue, economics and an English class. And I was so surprised, economics first of all, when we went in the first day, and of course I was scared to death. Purdue's totally different than IU. The professor said, how many of you have had, what was it? It was a math course. Like statistics or something, or calculus or something like that. I thought, oh, no, I'm never going to make this. So I really had to study hard.
Yeah.
And did fine, but I'm a self-starter through fear. I don't want to fail. Fear
Right.
of failure is a big deal for me.
Yeah.
But I was surprised at Purdue when, in the English class, when it was time for our finals, you had to buy your own blue book.
Hmm.
The university didn't supply blue books.
Yeah.
And that's not a big, that's not a lot of money, but it's just, like, what? So I had to go to the bookstore and buy a blue book to take my finals.
Wow. So, once you really started to identify as a Democrat, how did you first get involved in politics in the state?
Through the Teachers Association, which is a union, the Indiana State Teachers Association, and my local,
Mhm.
Albany, Floyd County. I became a member of our political action committee on the local level, and then through working hard, when people asked me, how did you get to be a senator? I said, well, whenever I told somebody I would come to a meeting or do something, I did it.
Yeah.
And it's not hard, you just do it, And so it ended up that I became a member of the State Political Action Committee and the chair of it for 9 years before I ran for office.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would come up and talk to my legislators. I was lucky in that at that time they were Democrats and they usually voted for more funding for schools or, not anything that was against schools. Probably my last 3 years in the legislature, I voted against and we defeated charter school bill.
Okay.
Because I knew that it would take money away from public schools, which public schools are in our Indiana Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
that a free public education should be provided. Right. And that has come to pass, that they have taken more and more and more. And then when a legislative leader says to you, well, we gave such and such million, gazillion, billion dollars to education, and that was a huge percent of our budget. They're talking about the vouchers that he gave and the funding for charter schools, etc. And the amount of the pie that goes to public schools just gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Interesting.
Universities, same way.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for Indiana University after I left the governor's office. And I worked there till we retired at age 65. And the percentage of money that our state school received from the state went down from probably, I think it started at least 2/3 before me there. But it was down to like 16% by the time I retired.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Now, politically, did you have any national political heroes or state people that you kind of looked up to?
Yes, I did. I very much supported Hubert Humphrey. That was the first presidential election I was old enough to vote in. I worked for John Kennedy, called people for John Kennedy when John Kennedy was running.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I did not notice, and I should have, is what a positive difference that LBJ had.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, he's not my president. My president was killed,
Yeah.
And he was an abrasive person, but he sure got stuff done. I mean, how do people ever retire without Medicare?
Yeah.
That was the 1960s, when that was instituted. I don't know what people did before that. One hospitalization would have just blown anything you had to retire with. So you'd be on welfare, I guess, but,
You're right, yeah.
So those kinds of issues, senior citizen issues, I was always involved in. When I went to the Senate, on purpose, you were assigned to 3 committees, and I was on the Education Committee after the first 2 years. Health Care and Health Committee I was on every year that I was in the Senate. And then, on purpose, I chose another committee that had nothing to do with anything I knew about. Elections Committee was the first year, and the first bill was the Elections Bill, and it was over 400 pages. And I tried to read that the night before we voted on it.
Yeah.
It wasn't really exciting reading either, but I tried to learn the different facets of state government, so I was better at figuring out what I wanted to do. Then the other thing I did being a teacher, our caucus chairman, Dennis Neary, I talked him into meeting with us for half an hour before the session started at 1 o'clock and going through the bills that day and letting us know, okay, is this a bill that has been, been proposed year after year after year, and what's the problem with it that we see, so that he could give us the history of things, so we knew what we were doing. And it started with me, and then when my other freshmen learned what I was doing, because I left lunch early, they came too. So we met all the time. And then probably 2 to 3 years in, when new people came in, I knew that they needed some help too. So I was an assistant caucus chair, so I assigned one of our members to each new person. Mm-hmm. And that was their person they could check with, on anything. Like, where do you go to eat,
Right.
Where's a good restroom? Just anything. Yep. And I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So when did you decide to run for the General Assembly?
I had been to at least 2 Democratic National Conventions. And I also went to Indianapolis to lobby for education. And the first person who asked me about running was Marilyn Schultz. And mm-hmm. She was, I don't know, have you learned what a person she was? She would not go to any reception in a building that women were not allowed to be in other than legislative women, And she started standing up for women before really Gloria Steinem and the whole crew started. Mm-hmm. So she was an inspiration. She heard me explain a bill to Bill Cochran, my state representative, who happened to have his desk near hers, in the cubby holes that are like the warren of desks when you don't have enough space. And she said, have you ever thought about running for the legislature? I said, oh no, I'd have to run against him. No way I'm going to run against him, Mm-hmm. Then Frank O'Bannon, before he was just the chairman of our Senate Democrat caucus and our leader in the Senate, he asked me to run. And he asked me to run against a Democrat senator, an incumbent, because this gentleman, I don't know if I should. This gentleman, and I'm not going to obviously say the name,
sure,
had a drinking problem and was prone to do things like leave his car running as he checked into the hotel and then go up to the room and forget it was there.
Jeez.
So he was afraid we'd lose that seat.
Yeah.
So when I ran, I couldn't say, he said, for me to run.
Wow.
And that was the promise I made him, that I would not.
Yeah.
And so people thought I was just an interloper trying to get rid of a Democrat,
Yeah.
And a lot of people never knew the real story. And, of course, I never told it.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Yeah. And it just so happened that senator's brother was Democratic Party chair in one of the 2 counties I represented.
Wow.
So it was really trying to swim upstream.
Yeah, that's an awkward situation. Mm-hmm. So when you ran your campaign, did you have a particular strategy at all?
Mm-hmm. That was going door to door to as many Democrats and independents as I could find.
Yeah.
And so I had precinct captains, and they had the cards that we filled out in the city county building in the clerk's office, and they put their cards in street order. Mm-hmm. And the best ones went around and wrote down, well, that's the White House, or that's this house, or that house. And so I would go with them in their car. Every day we left at 4 o'clock, and I would walk until dark. And then Saturdays we started at 10 o'clock, and I'd walk until dark. And Sundays after church at like noon or 1 o'clock. And so I did it every day.
Okay. So
rain, sleet,
Yeah.
snow. One person said to me when I knocked on the door, and I had on a slicker and a hat, and she said, "I thought you must be collecting for the paper. I didn't think anybody else would be out in this weather." I said, "No, ma'am. I'm Kathy Smith, and I'm running for state senate. Then give me my brochure, and I hope that you might consider voting for me on November 4th.
Yeah.
So, and then they could say anything to me they wanted to.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you this one.
Sure.
I was running to help people that weren't as affluent as I was, and I was certainly not affluent. And one house I went to in Clarksville, the little lady, smiled, and she was older, and she was obviously alone in this house. And she took my brochure, but she said, "Honey, I can't vote for you." And I said, "Why?" She said, "I don't think any woman has the intelligence or the honesty to run for political office." And it just tore me apart. Because she's the kind of person I'm running for.
Right.
You know.
Wow.
So you just want to, so many times you see something like that, you just like, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But I did it. Next house, okay. Next house, okay. Third house, guy came to the door with a cigar in his mouth.
Yeah.
Who the hell's at my door?
Right.
So I'm Kathy Smith, and I'm,
Yeah.
He said, "Well, the men aren't doing that darn good a job. I think I'll vote for you." So that almost happened every time. Every time you got somebody who was really nasty or angry at you, it wasn't too many houses later that somebody was really nice, and it kind of said, "Okay, I can do it some more." But it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
It's like asking people, "Do you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think I'm telling the truth?"
Right.
You don't do that to strangers. You do that to somebody that's a friend. Don't you trust me?
Yeah.
But you don't do that to strangers. And so that's tough. I don't know anybody who enjoys doing that, but you learn so much. And I would go back. Mm-hmm. I went back every time I ran, primary and general. So they could tell me what they liked, or they could say, "Well, how about canoes?"
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You never know, I guess, whose door you're going to be knocking on.
No, or who's going to answer it.
Yeah. Wow. Let's see. Do you remember your main opponent in the election, the Republican that you ran against?
Probably the most difficult one was the former mayor of New Albany, Robert Reel.
Okay.
He was a legend, still is, I'm sure, in our community as a fine man who ran the office of mayor in an honest, straightforward way. So he was my final opponent before I served then 2 years before Frank O'Bannon was elected. I never ran when the governor ran.
Okay.
He was elected and asked me to join his cabinet. So that was my scariest one because I knew how much he was beloved in our community. And I represented all of Floyd County and parts of Clark. But Floyd was my big numbers. Yeah.
So how did you run against him then? What was your strategy for that?
Be me.
Yeah.
Pass out these things. Realize that I've sent out all these newsletters, and I've also sent surveys that I try to ask questions in a straightforward manner. Mm-hmm. We kind of get angry when we get them now because the answer they want from the question they ask. So I tried never to do that. And I always okayed everything that went out from me. Mm-hmm. And anything that I passed out, usually, and I couldn't find it, had the phone numbers of state. Here, I do have it. Of state agencies that people might need. There.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a useful document.
Yeah.
People could probably use this today. I get phone calls from people randomly asking for someone. Like, I'm definitely not the right person. But you can.
It's not me. I don't know.
Yeah. Let's see. So what did you think of the election process?
I followed the rules, and I thought it was fair,
Mm-hmm.
and I still believe it's fair.
Yeah.
I was an inspector several times for my precinct, because it's hard to find people to do those things, okay? So I was the one who made sure the machine, we voted by machine
Yeah.
in Floyd County. But
So
you can't cheat.
yeah, sure.
And even today, we have a friend, we go to Silver Sneakers 3 times a week to exercise at the Y.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a friend who meets us for lunch afterwards, and he served as a sheriff at the polls this last election.
Oh, okay.
He said, how in the heck anybody thinks you can cheat? He said they have it so locked down, you know.
Yeah.
And it's true, with the advent of computers, it's very difficult to try to vote 2 places or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who come to your polls who are confused with where they're supposed to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you send them that other place.
Right. Yeah. So, what was your reaction when you found out that you won your first election for the General Assembly?
Well, let me tell you, before I got there,
Okay.
Mary Dieter was the Indiana reporter for the Louisville Courier-Journal, and she interviewed all of us, the candidates for state office. Well, it wasn't a state office, but you know what I mean.
Right.
It wasn't local. And so we talked, and I was an abused spouse for my first husband.
Mm-hmm.
He tried to kill me in front of our
Yikes.
daughter with a knife. And when that happened, I felt like about the lowest person ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her that, you know, that had been like 15 years earlier. My daughter was a senior in high school now.
Yeah.
And she was 4 years old at that time, 3 or 4. And I said, I've already won. She said, what if you lose, Kathy? I said, I've already won. And I hadn't even thought this through.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, 15 years ago, I could hardly face anybody in this community because my husband tried to kill me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that didn't happen to nice people back then. It does happen to nice people, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't quite
Right.
up to par. And I said, and now I've forced myself to run for political office.
Yeah.
And I said, that fact that I said yes and I've done it, I already won.
Yeah. Definitely.
And so that's when it came to me, no matter if I won or lost, I would still have won.
Yeah.
And I never thought I was going to win the race, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Never. I mean, I knew I worked my rear end off
Right.
so that I could say to myself any morning afterwards, hey, you did the best you could, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. Quite the change of circumstances then. Yeah.
it really was. And nobody ever brought that up either. That was a really nice thing. That was a really smart, really
Yeah.
positive thing about the whole deal.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said anything about it either in a campaign,
Mm-hmm.
the opposite side, or anything.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what were you thinking then when you walked into the State House for your first day as an elected official?
It was. I looked at the building and thought, now I belong here. And it was just, it was an amazing feeling that, you know, you work hard for something and then you achieve it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough at that time, there were 24 Democrats and 26 Republicans in the Senate then. And you know what it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And so my desk was up on the 3rd floor in front of one of those big, beautiful stained glass windows that's near the top of the State
Mm-hmm.
House. It was like, this has got to be a dream, you know? It's got to be a dream, until I had to start entering those 4,000 names
Right.
and addresses, and that was not a dream.
Yeah. That's reality.
With nobody else there to tell me,
Yeah.
okay, hit control, do the, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. I never took it for granted.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah, that's cool. What would you say were your expectations for the legislative process when you first got there? Was it more or less what you expected?
Yes, because I had been going up on, we had personal days at that time. They don't have them anymore. 2 personal days a year that you could do personal business, whatever you needed to do during the 5-day work week. And so I would take personal leave days and go up there. So I saw how education bills did or didn't go through. And I talked to Bill Cochran. He was like my mentor. He was my state rep. He was a state rep for years and years. And he was also the chairman of the political party when I first ran. And I went to him and asked him about running and, what's your advice? And so I knew a lot more about it because of that and because of the national and state convention experiences. So I knew pretty much how it went. And I remember it didn't make me happy, but it didn't surprise me when I had to give up my bills that I had the legislative services prepare for me to a Republican for first author, so that they had control of when it was called down, and then I was co-author. And that, I understood that.
Yeah.
They had a majority. So.
Yeah. So how did you keep track then of what your constituents wanted? Was it just mailings and?
Yes, and I had an intern, and she helped me with that. If it was a letter from someone about this, we filed it under that, and I answered all my mail. I answered my own mail.
Okay.
Now somebody else typed it up,
right?
But I wrote it out. And then off session, which is 10 months out of 12. I had no secretary. I had no office down in New Albany. I got stacks of mail like this that I had to really answer. I mean, and so they would call and ask me to come to a certain meeting, and I'd say, I teach school every day, and I made it, I made it a commitment to do that, and I don't leave school for meetings like that. Well, could you send your secretary? I said I probably could, but she lives in Indianapolis and works there too. I don't have one down here. So people were either nice about that or not nice about that, but they soon stopped asking me to come during school hours. They did ask me to come to evening meetings, which I had regularly, 2 to 3 to 4 days a week.
Right.
And so that was the difficult part was to be an English teacher and grade themes and papers.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, but other than that, it worked well. I had to keep organized, and I had bags. I still have bags, don't I? Cloth bags. Okay, this was my school bag I brought home every day. This was my legislature bag. This was my whatever else bag, And that's how I kept organized. Everything was filed in that bag, and I knew where things were. And then at school, we turned in our lesson plan books at the end of every year. And I asked my principal what happened to them. He said, we just file them. I said, could I have mine back so that I know when I started that, we started reading To Kill a Mockingbird in 9th grade, when I started that so I could get it done before I left for Indianapolis. And then the best thing was I was allowed to choose who took my place. I mean, I explained it to my principal, etc.
Right.
But I got really good substitute teachers to take my place when I was gone. And they taught like I did. That was important to me because I was firm. I was a disciplinarian, but I was also fair. And I was fun. I mean, we could laugh about stuff too. An example would be this. When I was teaching, there were slang books. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, kids had like notebook pages, and then what do you think about this person? What do you think about this teacher? What do you think,
Okay.
And then you just write it, they'd write it down and pass it around,
Okay.
But teachers would take those and not give them back.
Uh-huh.
I never did that. I gave 15 to 20 minutes at the end of each class period for them to start their homework while I was there to answer questions.
Yeah.
Remembering that math was not always my favorite subject or my best subject, and I had a math teacher that when I was in the classroom, I understood it. I understood what I was supposed to do, but he gave us no time to look it over and ask him any questions. So when I got home, it was like, I don't know how to do this,
Right.
So I didn't want that to happen. So if they got their homework done, they came up and showed me, then they could write in the slang books because they were writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew if I let them write notes or write in a slang book, they were writing.
Yeah.
And so that was the fairness part, I didn't try to ever go gotcha
Right.
with any of my kids. In fact, I told them at the beginning of the year, I'll never call your parents unless I've told you I'm going to call them first.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a surprise to you,
Right.
And so that's the kind of thing that kind of endears you to kids because you let them know you care about them as a person and you treat them as like a person and not a peon.
Yeah.
And I really missed my kids when I was gone, and they were kind enough to say they missed me, except for 1 year.
Okay.
1 year, the gal I depended on decided that she was done with her marriage with the gentleman she had had her children with, etc. He was not a nice person. And she left him and went to her high school sweetheart who lived down in Texas. And she called me 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for the legislature after Christmas.
Wow.
So I go to school the next day and I said, "You're not going to believe this." What? Jenny, I just told them that. And they said, "I never thought Jenny would do that." You could have, but not Jenny. I was like, what? So I had to find this young girl who just graduated from college, and she was gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
So she took over for me.
Okay.
So the first day I'm back, written in pencil on my, kind of formica-topped desk says, "I wish Miss So-and-so was back." And some of the kids came up and they looked at it and they said, I didn't write that. I said, "I know, I did." That's the kind of thing I tried to do, was always turn something to a joke. Because you can go through life moaning and complaining about everything, or you can go through life laughing. And after that incident with my first husband, when life could be over really quickly, I decided I was going through laughing. Trying to make, and raising my daughter the same way. When it was a terrible thing would happen to her, any terrible thing, I'd kind of, I'd understand and told her, she knew I understood, but I'd make a joke about it so we could laugh about it later,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I do things. My father, my parents didn't know that he was abusing me.
Okay.
Because he told me that he would kill them if I told him, and I knew he would.
Wow.
He's in law school. I'm putting him through law school.
Yeah, that's insane.
So, exactly. So when I finally called my dad, when I got out of the apartment, he helped me there for quite a few hours. I finally got out of the apartment because the gal next door, who was 7 months pregnant, went to the door and knocked on the door, and Bill thought that it was the police. And he said, "You go down there, bitch, and you get rid of him." So I took Allison's hand, ran down the steps and out the door, and never went back.
Mm-hmm.
And she came to my rescue, and Allison and I got out, and we have never, ever once since then taken a happy family for granted. Ever. And so I think I have a different view on life than maybe a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
Because each day is important to me.
Yeah.
So I know that you don't always have them forever.
Yeah, no, definitely, things like that definitely give people perspective on things.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. So thinking about your legislation a bit. What was the first bill that you sponsored? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm. The first bill I sponsored was a bill that increased the penalties for dealing drugs within 1,000 feet of a public or private school.
Okay.
And the perpetrator had an increased penalty for doing that if he was caught. And that was my first bill. My biggest legislation, the first year, I was asked to join Senator Patricia Miller, who was a long-time senator. She was chair of the Health Committee and very powerful woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked me to co-author her AIDS bill. It was when AIDS was just starting. The omnibus AIDS bill, which is still in effect, by the way, which is amazing, because it was a balancing act between your right for your privacy and the public's right to know, to be prepared. Just kind of like the COVID thing, when they had to do all this. So I was her second author, and I attended every meeting that we went to, and even this House looking at the committee and the House itself looking at the bill and voting on it. And that apparently wasn't usually done, And that's the way I got to meet Woody Myers, who was the youngest health commissioner we'd ever had in Indiana, and become very good friends with him through trial, and so that was my first major bill with her, and I developed and learned from her. By the way, she used to have all the lobbyists for and against a piece of her legislation into the Republican caucus room all together. She said, "Okay, tell me what you like about it, tell me what you don't like about it, and I'll change it if I think it's necessary." And so they would debate it back and forth, and you learn from them. There's no way you could come up here and know everything about everything, And I did that when I was in the governor's office, same thing. I had the Chamber of Commerce, the ISTA, the PTA, all manufacturers associations, all those people come in a huge room, I think in the state office building somewhere. And we sat down and talked about education legislation, etc. And it was a good, and I was also the head of all these different heads of agencies, within.
Right.
And so we met once every 2 weeks, a certain time, certain date. It was just set, and I wanted to know what was going on, what they had been doing, what they felt was a good thing, just to try to keep it all straight.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Okay.
But I learned that from her.
So, did you ever find it challenging to get a bill heard or at all, or to get support for bills?
Yes.
And what were the ways you tried to work around that then?
Well, I tried to go straight to the person who was holding it up.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that first bill about increasing the penalties.
Yeah.
Mary Dieter, who's the reporter who asked me, well, what if you lose? She came to me. She said, "Did you know that Bill Cochran, who was my head author or sponsor in the House, that he's holding that bill up?" I said, "No, he couldn't. He wouldn't." She said, "Yeah, he is." So I said, "Well, I'm going to go talk to him." She said, "I'm coming with you."
Yeah.
What he was doing was, he was saying he was one of the 4 people in conference committee on a certain bill they really wanted, and he wasn't going to sign it until he wasn't going to sign it until such and such, and he wasn't going to sign my bill until then too. Just holding things back. And we on his door, I said, "Are you holding my bill?" He said, "Yeah, come on in. I'll tell you why." And he did. He explained it to me, and he was a really good mentor. Dennis Neary in the Senate side, the caucus chair, was very good. And Bill Cochran was very good because he knew our local as well as our state politics and what we tried to do and how we could get that done.
Yeah.
So I could go to him, but I didn't use subterfuge ever to get a bill heard that I told him was something it wasn't.
Right.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Okay. So how crucial would you say it was to work with the other party then?
Absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Absolutely necessary.
Was it a pretty good atmosphere for bipartisanship?
It was. There were a couple of things. First of all, Senator Pat Miller was somebody that you knew, even when we were friends and we worked together on so much legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Every time she saw me, she saw a D in my forehead for Democrat. She was that partisan.
Yeah.
But also she was fair, so we worked well together. Other people, they didn't do that, and I think one of the reasons was that we had the Indianapolis Press Club. Did anybody say anything to you about that?
No.
Well, the Press Club was a restaurant area and bar, and that's where all the legislators, House and Senate, would go after a session, and get a drink. It was at night or grab lunch or whatever, and we could talk. We talked to each other all the time, and saw each other all the time. We did stuff like we had a talent show once that people in the House and the Senate who wanted to do it had a talent. Jesse, what was his last name? He was a magician. He did magic tricks.
Villapando, yeah.
Villapando, yes. So, it was a really good place to know people as people instead of just know them as the opposite party.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
It was. It all helped. It all worked together.
What about the difference between the House and Senate?
We didn't have the kinds of difficulties they seem to have now.
Okay.
We worked pretty well together. I know now it's not as easy.
Yeah.
And Bob and I were at an IU game, and I happened to see the man who was the second in command at the Legislative Services Agency, John, and I said, "John, how are you doing?" He said, "I can't wait until I can retire in 3 years." I said, "Why?" He said, "Kathy, I'm so damn tired of writing legislation for somebody so that they can gig someone else or get them out of the Senate or House." He said, "That's all I do. That's all I do." He said, it just makes me sick.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
When ran for Senate, Greg.
John Gregg?
John Gregg. When John Gregg was in the House, and he was in the back row because he was a new guy, he brought numbers on cards that he had passed out to the back row, and they graded everybody like you grade a dive. 7.1 or 2.3, and that was hysterically funny. They did things like that. I have a wooden clothespin in my box that I got this stuff out of today, because for several years you would go over there and somebody would stick a clothespin on the back of your jacket. You'd walk out of there, damn, you could go through a whole day and people would go and not say anything, you're wearing. And then they would put colors on the clothespin so they knew whose it was that got them.
Okay.
They had fun. And we were very serious.
Yeah.
We didn't have fun.
Yeah.
At all. But we worked hard, and they worked hard, but they just worked differently,
Well, why do you think the atmosphere then was so different in the House and Senate? Was the number of people there, or?
Yes, number of people, and what was expected. How you treated each other in the House was how guys treat each other, because it was mostly guys. In the Senate, it was more restrained. Bob Garton was the head of the Senate for all the years I was there, and he was very serious. He observed rules of his own, and one of them being that no conference committee report would ever come back with anything inserted in it that wasn't the same, the same portion of the law that bill was to do with. So don't mess the bills up, okay? He was Mr. Germain. And And so you followed along pretty carefully with something like that, because he was the head of this. And while we were there, the House changed. When we had 50-50 in the House, that's when the Speaker of the House lost the biggest piece of their authority and their power they possibly could lose, because they used to be the ones who called up any bill they wanted at any time they wanted to. So if they wanted a bill to die and they saw you leave the floor for any reason, they called it up while you were gone. Or he never called it up.
Yeah.
So after the 50-50, each legislator had the same power that we did, which was to call our bills up when we wanted to call them up.
Right.
And they were, on the agenda, but you didn't have to go write down the agenda for the day to call up your bill. So you had more ability to do that in the Senate than you did in the House.
Okay. Yeah. It must have been interesting serving at a time when the House was split like that.
Oh, yeah.
What was it like from the Senate perspective, dealing with that House in such a unique situation?
It was always, how are they going to do this? How are they going to do that? And that was the other thing. You remember when the House would change and the Democrats would be in power. Whoever the minority leader was would have to change his whole office over to the majority side.
Yeah.
And then back.
Yeah.
And they decided this is stupid.
Yeah.
So the Democrats stayed on the right and the Republicans stayed on the left. But when there was a bill that was really, one day I was going to go over and ask Bill Cochran a question. Okay, I walked out in the hall. A bait is over here. You know who they are? The motorcycle people.
Yep.
Who were scary. Then I'm walking across, state employees are down in the rotunda singing "We Shall Overcome." And the Indians, the Potawatomi, all those people and they were for the casinos, they're over on the House side with their drums, just remind them we're here.
Wow.
And I went into the House to walk onto the floor to talk to Cochran, and I heard somebody say, "Well, I'll take his chair and I'll throw it across." And I thought, hell's a poppin', what's going on?
Yeah.
And that was the day that Frank Newkirk from Salem, Indiana, changed from being a Democrat representative to Republican representative that gave them one more vote in everything.
Wow.
And angered Democrats. And it should have.
Yeah.
And his dad was the Democrat mayor of Salem. He never told his dad ahead of time.
Oh my God.
And of course, reporters ran to his office down there, and he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." It was not well done.
Yeah. Sounds
And it was the first
crazy.
time that had happened. It was like, oh my God.
So did Newkirk change during that 50-50 session? Or was
I
it
don't know.
after?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it was still Republican speaker.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would. Yeah, because it wouldn't have made us. Well, it did make a difference, but it wouldn't. I guess it would have made a bigger difference, 50-50, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I guess we could look that up.
Yeah, I could check. Probably. I was just curious. Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I feel like he probably did it because I feel like I would have heard that. That would have been pretty game changing during a 50-50 session. How someone changed.
Yeah.
That would have been wild.
Huge.
So
Yeah.
must have been some other time, but yeah, okay. Let's see. So how influential would you say party leadership was to dictating what legislation would make it or not?
They were influential, and so was the governor. I was amazed in the last 2 years when COVID hit and the governor mandated the masks and things. I think he handled it very well. And I was amazed when his legislators turned on him.
Yeah.
That would never have happened when I was here, or in any time up to then. I couldn't believe it. And columnist for the Indianapolis Star wrote a column about don't sell him short. He's got a lot of power, and you're going to be held, you'll be held accountable for the kinds of things you've done. But that's the national move,
Yeah, it's pretty contentious. Yeah.
It's scary to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if they can change the outcome of an election, then we are no longer a free democracy. And if they can call themselves into session and do that, I mean, I would never support that.
Right. Yeah. When you served, did you ever go against party leadership?
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like? How was that experience?
Well, on my side, Democrats are so different in that you're pretty autonomous.
Okay.
You can take a position, and if you can explain it in caucus, they're not going to censure you at all. If you say screw you, several women in my caucus, 2 women in my caucus when I was here, yelled screw you and walked out.
Wow.
And they became leadership. I said, now wait a minute, you're supposed to sit here and listen, I thought, but maybe it's like, what? It's crazy. But we were pretty accepted if we explained why we thought the bill was important.
Yeah.
And why I was on a bill that I did not propose at all about nursing homes with Tom from Fort Wayne. We went to his wife's funeral. It's hard. The one who helped us get...
Weiss.
Yeah, WYSS.
Yeah.
He said, now, Kathy, this is a contentious bill. And if you want, think about it. I want you to be second if you don't think it through. Well, I believed in it. Nursing home people were not the best people back then. They might not be now, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, I said, no, I believe in the bill and I want to do it. So then I talked to my leadership about it, and I said, I've said yes, and I do want to do it. Is it okay with you? And they, I can't remember them ever telling anybody not to support a bill or go on a bill.
Yeah. That's
Oh,
right.
and that was another big point.
Yeah.
I was worried that when I came here, I would be viewed by the male legislators as, okay, tap her on the head, okay, honey, it's all right, Never once.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's
Never once.
Yeah.
I was surprised and just hurt when 2 women who had been in the legislature a long time disliked every one of us who came in and gave us a hard time. You know how that when you have your first bill on the floor in the Senate, they grill you, and that's part of the
initiation. Yeah.
Well, this woman grilled me, and it was not pleasant, and it was real. And my guys didn't realize it until a little later on, and then they got up and defended my bill with me.
Yeah.
But it was not, it was tough, and she was on my case for a lot of years until she left.
Yeah. Okay. How many women were serving at the time when you were in the General Assembly?
When I came in, our freshman class had about probably 7.
Okay.
So we brought the numbers way up.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the...
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. See, how influential would you say lobbyists were in the General Assembly?
They were very influential, and they are very necessary.
Okay.
And I made that speech at home when I was in the Senate a lot. And for the reasons I just said to you, how in the world am I supposed to know about banking and, insurance? And they've got their own language, all these things without somebody who's a lobbyist. And I said, and the best ones tell you what they want and what the other side will say and why they think theirs is more valid.
Yeah.
And I also told them that your word's your bond up here. And you lie to a lobbyist, And within 24 hours, everybody in the whole state house knows.
Mm-hmm.
They lie to you, same thing.
Yeah.
So you lose your credibility and you lose your ability to do much of anything.
Yeah. Interesting.
So you always knew who to trust and who not to trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you'd find out, if they, if they just told you the wrong information.
And on purpose.
Yeah.
Not just if
Right.
they made a mistake.
Right.
And if they did make a mistake, they'd be running to you and sending a note in.
Yeah.
Please come out to talk to so-and-so. Please come out to talk to so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that's understandable.
Yeah.
But if they lied on purpose,
Yeah.
no.
Do you think like campaign donations or gifts had much influence on politicians, or?
I don't know about now. But the people who gave to me were people, like teachers, people that walks in the same moccasins, kind of.
Yeah.
And because I was on the health committee every year, I got to know not only the medical profession, but the hospital association and,
Yeah.
all those people. And people that you know are the people who really give to you. I was never in the majority, okay? So
Yeah.
I didn't get the big bucks
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
So that made it even better, I guess, because people who gave me wanted me to do well, but they knew I wasn't going to be able to change everything. They
Right.
wanted to change it.
Yeah.
There was money that came in more to the side that was in power. Campaign donation laws were very, very specific, and when you had to report, etc. And when your campaign committee had to report. So I don't know what Garton got, but I'm assuming it was like McConnell now. The biggest donator to my campaign was my dad.
How influential would you say gerrymandering was when you served?
Very influential.
Yeah.
Very influential. And even more now,
Yeah.
when they put two members
Uh-huh.
in the same district because they want one of them
Yeah.
knocked out, it used to be a gentleman's agreement on lots of things that you didn't do. If you didn't care for someone or they didn't follow you, you asked somebody to run, like O'Bannon asked me to run. But you didn't publicly humiliate people.
Yeah.
So that's changed.
Okay. So, thinking about your experiences in the General Assembly, what would you change about the legislative process?
From the time I was involved or now?
I guess you could talk about both if you want. During your service, what did you find that was like problematic?
Well, anytime you have that many people involved, things are going to be problematic.
Sure.
Because people view things completely differently than you do. And that's something you had to learn right away, is, you don't hate somebody because they disagree with you. If there are somebody who is firmly in that, has had that experience and they firmly believe this, you have to respect that. I don't think that's the same way now.
Okay.
But the respect that we held for each other and the friendships made it easier to bear when you were not the majority.
Yeah.
There were some people that were never very friendly or very honest with us, but that was like the jungle drums again. I mean, people knew. If I lied to somebody, they knew, and I lost, a lot for that. So, from the rules, the way the Senate and the House were conducted when I was in, I think were fair.
Okay.
There was a percentage that they followed that I'm not so sure they follow now, of how many Democrats there were for how many people on each committee was a Democrat, the
Yeah.
percent.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's followed now. That would bother me
Sure.
a lot. I
Yeah.
think if I were still here, I couldn't have my fair share to speak up.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say was the most controversial legislative issues when you served?
Well, the budget was always controversial.
Yeah.
We never had the surpluses they have now. Oh my Lord in heaven! In fact, the Indiana Constitution does not allow the state to go into debt because those canals put us in debt before the Civil War, and if it hadn't been for Lanier, who lived down in Madison, clothing and arming I don't know if it was platoon or whatever, but that group of Indiana Hoosiers who were conscripted to come fight for the North, we wouldn't have been able to do that because there was no money in the state. So that changed the Constitution, and we're not allowed to go into debt. That's still the case. So when I was lobbying, quote, not paid, just coming up here, Governor Ort needed money, and so he took it from the Teachers Retirement Fund, and I think it was $4 million. And we were never sure he was going to pay it back. Well, he never would admit that he took it, but then like 2 or 3 years later, when he got the money, he paid it back.
Yeah.
So that was, those were they had to do sleight of hand kinds of things in order to just keep going. But now, with the billions of dollars of extra money that they have, it's surprising that they don't fund things better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but when I was here, the newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, was very much a Republican paper at that time because the Pulliams owned it, and they were big Republicans. You know that Vice President Quayle was the grandson of the Pulliam who owned he owned the Muncie Star, the Indianapolis Star, newspapers all over Indiana. They're much more fair now. I mean, it's amazing to me, having the experience I had, how good those reporters are now. And they tell it like I know it is because I've been here. But that was tough when they would take you on because you were working for something that they didn't believe in as Republicans. I'm trying to think. One time I got crossways with the Supreme Court Justice, Indiana Supreme Court Justice, because I was crossways with his wife. And you know who's his wife? She's the one who's the Democrat on the television show that our friend used to moderate. Anyhow, he got upset with me because I was upset with his wife. And I did get in hot water one time with the governor, Governor Bai.
Okay.
He had 2 people who were his lobbyists for the governor's office who did not tell the truth. And I was co-authoring a bill with a Republican senator, and it was a nursing home bill, I think, and there was another bill that was counter to it. And I kept hearing that the governor wanted that one. What's going on? So I went to the governor's office, and I asked him, and his gal, who was his lobbyist for those issues, was right there with us, and I said, just tell me, do you prefer this bill? Because I'll back off on this one.
Yeah.
He said, no, I don't think so. He said, Ann, do I prefer that? And Ann says, if we could have a nickel for every time anybody said, So I thought, okay, I'm all right. Then I'm sitting in the Senate lounge, and I hear her say to Bill McCarty, Bill, we don't like this one. We like that one. I said, Ann, you just told me in the governor's office that you liked my bill. We did? Oh, yeah. Okay, Bill, vote for her, Bill. I said, wait a minute, how many people have you told that to? Oh, he's the first one. So I wrote the governor after the session, and there were other issues that the mail guy did too, that her counterpart from the governor's office. I said, they're not doing you any good, Governor. You know, they're not doing you any good. So he calls me in, and I think I'm going to talk to him about it. He has me sit down, and those two are at me. And I didn't get upset. I didn't cry, I was not going to cry. One of them finally said, well, you know, we don't have to like you at all. I said, well, that's a damn good thing, because I don't like either one of you at all either, you know. Mm-hmm. So he did not handle that well.
Yeah.
Governor Bai wasn't the strongest Democrat that ever ran the state.
Okay. What would you say was the most complex piece of legislation that you worked on?
Education funding was always complex.
Yeah, I bet.
There's so many different funds and so many rules on each. That was always complex. Insurance legislation, which is one of the bills I'm proudest of, by the way. It was not my bill, but I was co-author on it. And it's known all through the United States as the Indiana Plan. Mm-hmm. It was a bill that we passed that told insurance companies, okay, if you're going to sell to Medicaid people, long-term care insurance, whatever, these are the things that have to be in it. Mm-hmm. If they're not in it, we will not endorse it, and we will not allow it to be sold in Indiana. And up to that time, insurance companies did what they pleased here. Yeah. And so they conformed to it. And in that legislation, too, you did not have to spend down all your assets before going into a nursing home. So that was huge. So that bill is one of my proudest things, that long-term care bill.
Yeah, I was going through the newspaper archives and saw some piece of legislation that kept popping up while you were serving. Let's see, I saw something about legislation regarding like spousal abuse. So what legislation did you work on with that?
Well, I did not tell people that my husband tried to kill me in front of my daughter. Mary Dieter knew it only because I said, well, I already won. Time to think of it, you know.
Yeah.
So Representative, oh gosh, he became mayor of Bloomington. What's his name? Cruzan. Mm-hmm. I mean, Cruzan was one of the smartest legislators over there, most progressive, very much admired. Mm-hmm. He came to me, and he had this spousal abuse bill, and he said, Kathy, Bill Cochran told me that you would be a good person to carry this bill in the Senate. And I looked at it, and, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So just like I told you I did with AIDS bill, I went over to the committee when it was first heard in the House. It was a House bill, first heard in the House, and I testified for it in committee and told them, it was marital rape as well as domestic violence. Told them my background, and they asked questions about, why didn't you leave? And I said, well, I did. And the bill passed, and no newspaper people were in the room. Mm. So again, when I spoke for it, when it came to the Senate, in Senate committee there was a Indianapolis reporter in the room, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that person.
Okay.
I would have said what I said anyhow, but I didn't know it was going to be on the front page of the paper. Mm-hmm. And my ex-husband who did that lives in Kokomo, Indiana. Mm. So I'm sure, he gets the Indianapolis Star. And he sees that. He at that time, he was still an attorney before he lost his license. Mm-hmm. I worked at Sears every night, taught all day, worked at Sears every night so we could get him through law school.
Anything he lost his license.
Yeah. So anyhow, that was on the front page of the paper.
Yeah.
And I was always worried that he would come back after me.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the state police would call him, his number, like every 6 months to make sure of where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that for me even after I left the Senate.
Wow.
And my daughter, thank God, was on spring break, so I could get to her first and tell her what happened. And of course, I called George right away. And it was amazing. And I'll tell you, after I first let it be known what happened, I never once gave a speech anywhere that I didn't bring that up and talk about that for 5 to 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Every time. One of the most beautiful women in the class, classiest people in the class, would be waiting around till everybody left. And then they'd come up to me and they'd either be able to tell me what happened or they'd just start to cry and I'd hug them and they'd hug me.
Yeah.
And it was never the person that you would have thought,
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that's happened. We know that it's everywhere. And in fact, after I left the Senate, I started volunteering with the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And every year they have a big fundraising dinner, and they honor people who've stood up. And one year when you were with me, they honored Judy O'Bannon. Mm. And Judy stood up and talked about the fact that it's endemic in our society. So don't look down on anyone,
Mm-hmm.
And she said she was visiting shelters in the Indianapolis area because she thought that was something important to do. She walks into one shelter and there is her husband's, he's dead by this time, he died, her husband's cardiologist wife that they went on trips with and
Wow.
All kinds of social, and she was battered. And Judy said, "What's going on?" She said, "You never knew, did you?" And Judy said, "No." She said, "Well, he does this when he gets angry at me."
Wow.
And I spoke to a group of women in Bloomington, and you can tell if they believe you or not. And all you have to do is look at their eyes. And I wasn't getting it. I wasn't getting it across.
Mm-hmm.
So I used the Judy O'Bannon example.
Mm-hmm.
And forgetting that the woman who was hosting it's husband is a cardiologist. And she said, "How old was she?" I said, "I don't know." Judy just, she said, "Oh my God." She said, "There was a wife of a guy in his class, my husband's class, who brought money and jewelry to me and said, 'Please just hold it for me.' And she said, 'I could never figure out why.'"
Mm-hmm.
And I said it was probably her escape money.
Hmm.
And so everybody in the whole room went, oh my God, this is true." And then Cheryl Fikes said, "Kathy's right, we're going to go pick up my daughter at the airport today. Her husband from California, who's a rock star or something, is beating the hell out of her. So she's coming home."
Wow.
And when one of my bills I was proud of too was there was nothing in the curriculum at the Law Enforcement Academy in Plainfield that talked about how you deal with domestic violence situations.
Wow. Okay.
And back then there was a big chunk. Now it's at least half of every time they go out they have to be worried about that. So I that was one of my bills that had to be in the curriculum. They couldn't find anybody to teach it. So I taught the first few months of that class. And I was there talking to them, and I was always talking about, the female being the survivor, victim and survivor. And after class, a gentleman waited up for me, and he was police chief in Anderson, Indiana.
Yeah.
He said, "Kathy, I'm a victim of domestic violence." I said, "You are?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "My wife doesn't hit me. But if I don't do it, she wants me to do, when she wants me to do it, she tells me she'll kill herself. So I never say women only anymore.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it takes you right back. When you talk about takes you right back, emotionally, you know. So it's a difficult thing. It's not something I look forward to doing. It just so happened I talked to a group of people in Scottsburg, Indiana, within weeks before we were married. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time you really understood my trust issues. You know, it's hard to trust somebody after that.
Definitely, yeah. Wow.
And he was so good at hiding that. He had been a pharmacist. That's when I was at Purdue that last year. That was his last year of pharmacy school. Mm-hmm. And he was a charmer. And I would meet people who would say, "You're Bill's wife? We love him. Isn't he wonderful?" And I just go, Yes. And you wouldn't believe this, but it's the truth. I went to the home of the two gentlemen who were the co-owners of this pharmacy, and they were old enough. When I had Allison, they were her grandfathers, you know. Mm-hmm. And he didn't try to kill me until she was about 3 years old. And when I went to their door, and they said, "We miss Bill so much," you know. Mm-hmm. And I told them what happened. They just couldn't get their minds around it.
Yeah.
And you can't. I mean, he was Jekyll and Hyde, you know. And what a waste. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a waste.
Wow. You mentioned that you had worked on a fair amount of education legislation. It sounded like from the newspapers there's a lot of education reform. What exactly was the work that you were doing at the time?
Well, the education reform that happens through the Mind to Trust and all that was not reform.
Okay.
It was the beginning of the charter school kind of movement, where schools were established that did not have to follow any of the state rules.
Okay, yeah.
Many of them didn't have to do the test that was forced upon our kids. You know, in order to graduate high school, you had to pass this test. In order to graduate from 3rd grade to 4th grade, you had to pass the test. You know, it became test manic.
Right.
And my kids, some of them were test phobic. And I knew that when they were faced with something like that, it would just kill them.
Yeah.
You know. And there was a woman who was the volunteer lobbyist for special ed kids. Apparently she'd had a special ed child. And when that whole thing came up about the test, she insisted that every special ed kid take that test. Some can't even read.
Right.
And they cry and be so upset weeks ahead of time. And during 4 hours of the test, every day there was 4, and the next day there was 4. They're just in hysterics crying. Mm-hmm. And there was no need for that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was one of the most difficult things I saw happen. And when Governor O'Bannon did ask me to be his education person in his cabinet, I learned later that this lady went to him and said, "She hates special ed kids. What are you having her?" Because I didn't agree with her that they should take that test. Mm-hmm. But see, some of her side of that story is that she fought so hard for those kids to be in school, you know, to be integrated into a school system and a school community. Right. That she didn't want anything different for them than the regular school kids had. Mm-hmm. And so that was her motivation. But my last 2 years of teaching, special ed needs kids were mainstreamed into regular classes. And I'd never had any classes on how to teach special ed. Mm-hmm. Neither had my teachers in my whole school. Yeah. And all of us were just, I cried every day after school. I went home and cried every day because in order to keep them understanding what we were doing, the people who were ahead and average got so much less of me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even discuss stuff with them because I was answering these questions, and I didn't have any kind of an aide or anything who could take them to another couple of desks and talk to them. You know, that would have been okay. But it was frustrating for them. It was tearing me apart, and they're bored as can be. And these guys were thinking, well, why isn't she talking to us? You know, it was a divisive, terrible situation. And that kind of reform does nothing but hurt kids. And my teaching and my public school teaching is not only my profession, it is my heart.
Yeah.
And people who hurt kids, I hate, and
Sure.
I'm not a hater.
Yeah, understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I don't believe it's a whole lot better now. We used to be able to have some say because the superintendent of public instruction was an elected position. And so if we had any political sway at all throughout the state, it was with that position, okay? Now, did we have Democrat ones? No. Sue Ellen Reed was the superintendent of public instruction for a lot of years when I was in the Senate and when I was in the governor's office. She was fabulous. She was fabulous. She was Republican. She was kid first. She was great. She was even, she was not popular with Republican governors who tried to defeat her. But she stuck it out as long as she wanted to, and, you know, she retired when she wanted to retire because she was loved. And the push to push any secretary of education or any superintendent of public instruction out by this governor and the governor before was unconscionable. Jennifer McClintock, who was the Republican gal who took out the one Democrat who served for just one term. McCormick, that's right. She was kid-oriented. She was great. She decided not to run again because everything she tried to do was stopped by the governor. And his, he had an education committee that he appointed of business people. You know, if you're smart, you realize people who walk in those moccasins know the best. You got to listen to some of them.
Yeah.
And it was not being done, and still not done because there is no position.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. I saw that there were some debates going on regarding like abortion when you served. What exactly was the conversation like? Was it similar to what was going on today, or?
Yeah, it was. And I was always firm in my belief that that it was a woman's right to choose. Mm-hmm. And I had some difficulties during my town meetings when I went home.
Yeah.
Especially with one woman who was. I said, "We're not going to agree on this issue, okay? There's no reason to badger me every time I'm home, because I'm going to tell you the same thing. We're not going to agree on this. You know, and as long as I'm in an office, that's the way I'm going to work."
Yeah.
I didn't tell her that, you know, the national statistics were that at that time 75% of the people thought, you know, that there should be abortions when they're necessary, and also when the woman was not able to have a child at that time. Mm-hmm. And now I'm amazed and disgusted that they think so little of women. That states, as soon as the Supreme Court's going to act, have the trigger bills all done, and many of them do not make any exception for rape, incest, or mother's life.
Yeah. Must be incredibly strange for you because it would look like you're going backwards in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've never, ever said to anyone, "Honey, you go ahead and have abortion. I've never counseled anyone to get an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter and her husband, 7 years of in vitro fertilization. And if you've never gone through that with anybody, you don't realize
Mm-hmm.
how difficult and terrible that is. Because every month when they've inserted the eggs into her ovaries that have been blastocysts have been the sperm has gotten into them, and it has a certain look, and they put them in, and then the next time she has a period, it's like a death in the family. My daughter is the most sunny, funny, bright, happy kid, okay? She was a basket case for all those years. I went down when I was home, I was with her every weekend, but when I moved to Indianapolis because I worked in the governor's office, I went down there and stayed every weekend so Scott could go to his law office and get something done.
Yeah.
And when she finally conceived Jack, and they did that in vitro, that picture, and where they put the stuff on the tummy, I carried that with me. And have you seen one? It looks like there's like a light on this forming infant's face.
Yeah.
And, you know, I testified in committee in the House after I'd left about their trying to end that practice. And I said, I think that's God looking down at my grandson. And I wouldn't have had a grandson without medical science coming to where it is.
Yeah.
You know, and Tim Brown was the chairman of that health committee. You know, he's a doctor. He said, we're not hearing that bill. So that was great. That was great. But it was that far back that they've been trying.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And now in vitro would also be banned because when you didn't conceive, those eggs are flushed, you know, through your body. So it makes no sense, and it's so injurious to people. It's so nasty, especially to women who have no money to go across state lines to an abortion clinic, or to doctors who have to hide where they live, so they don't get killed. I don't understand that. I don't. That's one thing that you asked me if you know. If you don't, that's one thing I do not understand.
Yeah.
Just don't understand.
Sure. Saw there was also some legislation on like regarding child abuse when you served. What exactly was going on with that?
Well, it's still happening, and I was involved with the coalition while I was still in the Senate, and you know, one year one of the things they did was come to the State House and read not the names, but a little boy, this how many years old, died with his head forced into the toilet until he drowned. You know, you listen to those, and I would read every 10th one out loud, show support. It tore us apart. Absolutely tore us apart. And so anytime there was legislation to help protect those people from their parents, I was for it. And you know, the abused kids want to go back home because that's all they know.
Yep.
Allison never did. She never really wanted her dad back. But I know many times then those kids become abusers because that's all they know. And that's hard for me to understand. I mean, I'm not going to judge because I wasn't physically abused or mentally abused. But boy, anything I could do to help protect those kids, I did.
Yeah, definitely. I also saw there was some work on homeless legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And well, tell me about that.
Well, we have a gal down in Jeffersonville, which was the Clark County portion that I had, and I usually had the downtown area, and that's where homeless people would usually be, because somewhere down there, like up here, there would be steam, heat coming up from some grate, on a sidewalk or whatever, and they would gather around those things. So Barbara Anderson was her name, and she was top notch, and she was someone who was not only an advocate but someone who would search out any grants she could find, etc. So anything that she needed my help on, I did. I mean, obviously, I didn't do anything against the law, but I
Right.
advocated for her and for that group of people because they didn't have anybody speaking for them because they didn't vote. Number one, which if if all you're doing is trying to get voters, that's important to you. They didn't usually have anybody to help them. And in Indianapolis, Kathy Williams takes on all those. She's a lobbyist. She takes on all those groups, and every time almost she gets knocked down and her bills don't go through, and she keeps coming back. And I admire her so much, and I've told her that several times. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that if she still is doing it, but I think she is. Mm-hmm. Does that name sound familiar to you?
I haven't heard before.
Okay. But anyhow, they're usually women who advocate for those people who don't have the representation they should.
Yeah.
And that's me.
Yep. Yeah, I understand. So moving towards just kind of some big picture questions and reflective questions on your service, how would you summarize your time overall as a state legislator?
It was wonderful. The friends you make there are friends forever. It's just like when you hear kids on athletic teams.
Yeah.
True friendships. And a lot of my compatriots are dying, which is really difficult. But I keep in touch with them. And it was, overall, it was a very positive experience. Except I've never been so tired in my life, though. Because I had many things to do for that position as well as teaching. It was very tiring.
Yeah. What lessons did you learn from your experiences?
I'm sorry to say that I learned that people aren't always what you thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
When you find someone who doesn't have the clay feet, it's probably one person out of 5 that you thought you really, when you knew about them before you had to work with them or whatever, you were all, oh gosh, how wonderful. And then the reality isn't always as pretty.
Yeah.
But that made you like that person more and be willing to do anything for them to be successful in what they were doing, in politics. So.
Sure. Did you have any regrets as a legislator?
I think the time away from my daughter.
Yeah.
And my husband. Those were big regrets.
Yeah.
And it so happened that the education committee that I was on, the chairman decided that we would meet at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. So coming from New Albany, I couldn't be sure I'd get up here in time for the meeting if I didn't come the night before.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah.
I had to come spend Sunday night here too. And the funny part is I would just get used to sleeping without George in the bed by Friday. And then Friday night and Saturday night, I couldn't sleep very well because George was in the bed. And then, the whole thing would start over again,
Yeah.
So that was, that's just, I don't know, it's just kind of crazy.
Sure.
I remember one time I had to leave them to go back to Indianapolis, and I just started crying in the car, so I turned around, went home. I said, we didn't think this through. It's okay, Mom. It's all right.
Yeah. It's always difficult, for people having to commute to Indianapolis and with their families. Yeah, it's tough.
Have you had to do that?
I have had to commute, no, not like that. So luckily I've been able to dodge a commute.
Good.
But
It's not easy.
no, it's not. Yeah,
But, I was only like 2 to 3 months a year, so that was better than someone with a full year's commitment that they can't.
Yeah, the year before I came to India, I'm originally from Kansas. I worked for the Kansas version of Legislative Services for a year, and I was commuting about 30 minutes or whatever. You would be stuck whenever legislators were there, so you could be there for 24 hours. So a few nights it was pretty late getting back, but just
and
par
some
for
people
course.
don't even think about who they're keeping here.
Yeah, that's right. You're just there until you're told to go home. So but yeah. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
It's hard to pick one, because when you pass a bill like the AIDS bill, we thought it would work well.
Yeah.
And protect who it needed to protect. But you never knew for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time that comes into effect, July 1st or whatever, or sometimes a piece of legislation, you went from A to B instead of A to Z.
Mm-hmm.
And so each year you had to add on, try to get this part through, this part through, this. So it wasn't like gratification immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So proud moments came here and also came at home when somebody came up to me and said, thank you. You really made a difference in my life, and I appreciate it. That's your proudest moment.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the aspects of when you're crafting legislation is that seems like there's usually going to have to be some type of edits to it later on.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have no idea how it operates when it's implemented.
Exactly. And if you can't compromise, you don't belong in a legislature at all.
Right.
I mean, if you come up here thinking, I've got the best idea and nobody can improve on it.
Yeah.
Somebody can think of something you didn't ever think of.
Yeah.
Somebody could have thought of canoe.
Yep. That's
They
right.
didn't.
Yeah, true. So based on your experiences, what advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
I think my advice would be, you represent both parties. You represent people who don't have a political party. Your focus should be Hoosiers. If you're in the state legislature or state government, not who you can make look stupid so that you'll win the next election. You've got to look yourself in the mirror, even after this is over. And how are you going to do that knowing that you spent time trying to really put it to somebody else instead of trying to help the people who elect you? And that's all I would have to say. I'm not sure I would be speaking to McConnell or to West Virginia, the guy who said his name. Joe Manchin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, they're the worst kind of thing. They're what give all the rest of people call politicians a bad name.
Mm-hmm.
And every group, I don't care who it is, usually 95% of the people are good people working hard, doing the right thing. But there's the 5%, and now they seem to all be in positions of authority.
Mm-hmm.
There's the 5% that are just as narrow-minded as they could possibly be for whatever reason. And I said this time and time again when I talked about lobbyists, because I guess they still have a terrible name, but I said the whole thing about everybody knows if they lie to you, and I need to know about these other things that I have no idea about when I go up there.
Yeah.
So I just think they've got to they have to become more cognizant. I mean, they're all good Christians, right? Well, they're not. If you don't do unto others as you would have them do to you're not. I don't care if you're a deacon in the church or whatever, you are not a good Christian, because you are not a person who does the right thing for other people, which you are supposed to do when you're elected.
Yeah.
You represent. So that's what I'd say to them.
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Screw you, lady."
What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Is to make the lives of Hoosiers easier, more fair if they can. Instead of feathering the pockets of people who have already either been lucky enough to be born into a family that is affluent or has the ability to be happy or whatever, remember that there are people that are being left behind every day.
Yeah.
And your position gives you the possibility of being a help to them. And so that's important. That's the most important thing to me, is that you take care of the people you represent.
What would you say the public does not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
What hard work it is. They don't know that. They don't know that, again, that 95% of the people who are up there are working hard. They believe differently than you might believe, but they're hard working. They're people who are following what they think they should do for the people. As long as you're doing that, even if you don't agree with me or to anybody else, you're doing the right thing. As long as you're true to yourself, you're true to the people that you represent.
Right.
So,
see, how has the state of Indiana changed over the course of your lifetime?
there were more Democrats here as I was growing up.
Yeah.
they've all gone.
Yeah.
It has become more and more conservative.
Yeah.
In the worst look of the term, I don't believe all conservatives are, anti-abortion, anti-public education,
Right.
whatever. I do believe that there is a segment of wealthy people in the country who are trying to get rid of public education because they think we're all liberal and that we're inculcating our politics to the kids that we're teaching, which is not true. And I know a handful of teachers over 28 years that I could say, not sure they're telling kids the right thing, that they're...
Right.
But, other than that...
Indiana goes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That uncaring, rigid belief system that seems to be getting more and more prevalent in the state is a difference I've seen.
How have the people of Indiana changed?
I don't think they have.
Okay.
I don't think they have.
Yeah.
The general public.
So what would you want the people of Indiana then to know about their influence on the General Assembly?
Well, I try to get my friends to contact their legislator on an issue, whether it is a public school issue, whether it's whatever.
Yeah.
And they don't believe, many of them do not believe it makes a difference. And I'm telling you it does. Because I remember especially the secretaries of people who were pretty much in power within the legislature saying, oh my God, I got 200 calls just today about this bill, And their legislator, if they're smart enough, they listen to what that person said.
Yeah.
And when you're in a business that you're trying to make people respect you and make people happy and give them a better life, you hear that many people that will take the time and the energy to call you or to email you, you better listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this last session, when Republicans cut off the messaging, the email messaging after so many emails about public schools and public school funding,
Yeah.
and don't do this to public schools, that the critical race theory is never taught in K through 12. But it worked for the governor-elect of Virginia to use that, so that, all of a sudden there are 87 bills in our legislature about something that isn't even real.
Yeah.
I think that when they hear a lot of people telling them that, who wear the moccasins, they ought to be listening.
Yeah.
So, and I know that many do.
Right.
I know many do.
Sure. Last question I have. Can you talk a little bit about the bipartisan group of legislators that you're a part of? Armida?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's going back to the way it was when I was in the legislature. Every year when you leave the legislature, especially after special session, and we had lots of those when I was in the legislature at the end of the year, you think when you leave here, I never want to see those people again. My whole life, you're just burned out.
Right.
Just don't ever,
Yeah.
Then you come back for a summer study committee, and it's so-and-so, how have you been, what are you doing, That's how it is in the Amiga thing.
Yeah.
Now, there are very many more Republicans than Democrats, and I'm trying to get Democrats to join, but they think it's all Republicans, which doesn't matter to me. They're friends. From when I was in the legislature, they're friends. So, anyhow, it's a great group. We lost the person whose idea it was, etc., when he died.
Brian Hassler.
Yeah, Brian Hassler. And so we lost some momentum then. But we're still working. It's not a full-time gig, but coming back and seeing those people is great fun.
Yeah.
Listening to the stories is great fun, especially the stories the House members have.
Sure.
We're kind of like, oh, that was great. We never done anything like that, So that's fun. It's good to see them, and it's good to be remembered too. And And so I enjoy it, and I've been the vice chair for, I think, almost since the inception of it. They enjoy having a Democrat as well as,
You're
and
the
they
token Democrat.
Yeah. Well, they asked me when who left as our president. They asked me if I wanted to be the president. I said, no, thank you. I'm busy enough as it is.
Yeah.
It's crazy how busy we are in retirement. It's crazy how busy we are.
Yeah.
But I want to put my full support toward it. So I enjoy it.
Yeah. How many people are in it in total?
Oh, when we have a meeting, the big meeting, probably what?
30.
Between, 25, 30 will come.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yes.
You meet at Indianapolis, or?
Yes, we've been meeting at the fairgrounds, in fact.
Okay. Wow.
There's a building out there that is it the Farm Bureau building? That we'll have a luncheon catered there, and then a meeting, and then a picture.
Neat. Okay.
Or the barn.
The big barn.
Yeah, we've used that too. But see, COVID just stopped everything.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So we haven't really had a big meeting since then.
Yeah.
But we will.
Yeah. Cool.
And we invite former legislators from all over to come.
Yeah.
And a lot do, especially ones who've lost a spouse.
Yeah.
They come because they're darn lonely,
Sure, yeah.
And so that's good, because we give them a day of laughing.
Definitely.
And good fellowship.
That's
so
cool.
It is.
Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention, or did we cover it all, or?
I'll think of a lot of stuff on the way home.
Yeah, okay. For the next interview. That's
right.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome, Ben. Thank you.